Caroline Levitt dismantles Ilhan Omar and her allies. They faltered, the cameras hummed, the reporters braced themselves. The atmosphere crackled with foreboding. Everyone sensed this was no ordinary exchange. This wasn't just another debate in a dusty academic chamber or a fleeting political squabble on the evening news. It was a confrontation of cosmic proportions, a clash of intellects and convictions that promised to ripple far beyond the room's confines. Reporters lined the edges, their cameras poised like sentinels, their notebooks open, pens trembling with anticipation. The air buzzed with a restless energy, as if the very molecules knew something monumental was about to unfold. At the heart of it all stood two figures: Caroline Levitt, resolute and unyielding, and Ilhan Omar, composed yet visibly braced for the storm ahead. The massive oak doors creaked open, and Levitt stepped forward, her presence steady and commanding, like a knight entering a battlefield ordained by fate. The murmurs hushed. Every journalist straightened, every lens swiveled to capture her. She approached the podium, adjusted the microphone with deliberate care, and surveyed the room with a gaze that cut through the haze of expectation. Then, with a voice sharp as tempered steel, she unleashed her opening salvo. "Let's set the record straight," she began, her tone slicing through the silence. "What you're about to hear today will dismantle one of the most pervasive and dangerous misconceptions ever peddled to humanity." She paused, letting the words hang in the air like a thunderclap. The tension thickened. Reporters exchanged quick, uncertain glances. The audience watching from homes and offices leaned closer to their screens. Levitt didn't waver. She held the room in her grip, exactly where she intended it to be. "For too long," she continued, "Ilhan Omar and her allies have pushed a narrative about God that's as seductive as it is reckless. They claim it's a vision of compassion, of unity. But today I'll prove to you it's a distortion that undermines the very foundations of truth." A voice pierced the stillness, sharp and probing. "Caroline, are you saying Ilhan Omar has been lying about God?" The room froze. Heads swiveled toward the source, a senior correspondent from CNN, known for her unrelenting scrutiny. Levitt's lips curled into a faint smirk. She leaned forward, locking eyes with the journalist. "Not just lying," she replied, her words measured and piercing, "but misleading millions with a vision of divinity that collapses under its own contradictions." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A pen slipped from a reporter's grasp, clattering to the floor. Whispers darted between seats. This was escalating fast. At the back of the hall, Ilhan Omar sat motionless, her face a mask of stone, though her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. She knew what was coming. She just didn't know how deep the blow would strike. Omar shifted slightly, maintaining her composure, though her fingers began a subtle, rhythmic tap against the wood. This wasn't a routine exchange of ideas. It was an ambush meticulously orchestrated. A reporter near the front broke the silence. "Caroline, if you're accusing Ilhan Omar of distorting theology, where's your evidence?" Levitt didn't hesitate. "Oh, I thought you'd never ask," she countered, reaching down to retrieve a thick folder. She held it aloft, letting the camera zoom in on its unassuming cover. "Right here, concrete proof that exposes everything." Omar crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "This is absurd," she said, shaking her head. "More fear-mongering, more baseless accusations. People deserve better than this." Levitt turned to her, her expression razor-sharp. "Oh, we agree on one thing, Ilhan. The people do deserve better. Better than the half-truths you've been feeding them about the divine." The atmosphere grew stifling, a cauldron of anticipation and unease. Reporters scribbled furiously, others watched, eyes flicking between the two women. The CNN correspondent pressed again. "Then let's hear it, Caroline. What's in that folder?" Levitt flipped it open with a flourish. "Let's start with your own words, Ilhan, shall we?" She pulled out a printed page and held it up. "You recently said, and I quote, 'God is whatever we need him to be, a force of love, a reflection of ourselves.' Tell me, how can that be true when history shows us a God of justice, of order, of unyielding principle?" She turned to the audience. "How can God be a mere mirror when the scriptures, across traditions, speak of a being who demands accountability?" Omar leaned forward, her voice cutting in. "That's a gross misrepresentation of what I said. Levit raised an eyebrow. Really? Then let's talk about what you didn't say, because omission can be just as revealing. She flipped another page. When scholars and believers cried out against tyranny, when empires fell under divine judgment, when the innocent suffered and begged for meaning, you stayed silent on God's wrath. Why? Omar scoffed. That's not true. Levit didn't miss a beat. Then say it now. Right here, right now. Acknowledge the God of judgment, not just the God of comfort. The room fell silent. Every eye locked onto Omar. The camera zoomed in, capturing the weight of her pause. She didn't respond. Levit smirked. That's what I thought. Whispers erupted among the reporters. Omar's silence reverberated, louder than any rebuttal. Levit set the folder down with a deliberate thud. I have more, a lot more, but let's give Ilhan a chance to defend herself. She gestured toward Omar. Go ahead, explain your theology. Omar took a deep breath, steadying herself. Gladly, she said, rising slightly in her seat. Her voice was calm but firm. Let's be clear about what's happening here. This isn't about truth. It's about twisting faith into a weapon to divide people. Levit chuckled, shaking her head. Classic. When cornered, deflect and attack the messenger. Omar ignored her, turning to the reporters. This entire spectacle is designed to distract from real questions. What does God mean to the suffering? To the oppressed? While Caroline waves papers, people are wrestling with doubt, with pain. Levit leaned on the podium, her smirk unwavering. Doubt and pain caused by a theology that promises everything and delivers nothing. Omar's eyes locked onto hers. Tell me, Caroline, what have you done to wrestle with God's nature, other than stand here and grandstand? A murmur rippled through the room. The reporters sensed blood in the water, a real fight. Levit's expression didn't falter. Unlike you, I don't just speculate, I reason. Let's go over a few things, shall we? She lifted another page. Your vision of God as a shapeless force of love ignores the evidence of history, divine law, divine retribution. You call that progress? Omar crossed her arms. That's a gross oversimplification, and you know it. God's nature is complex. Levit cut in. Not that complex. Acknowledge the evidence. Hold fast to what's been revealed, or stop pretending you have answers. Omar's eyes darkened. You want to talk evidence? Let's talk about the corruption of dogma in your camp. Centuries of using God to justify power, exclusion, war. Levit's expression remained steady. You're right, Ilhan. Let's talk accountability. That's exactly what we're doing now. The room crackled with tension. Levit tapped her folder. And while we're at it, let's discuss something you'd rather avoid. Omar's composure flickered, just for a moment. Levit saw it, and she knew she'd struck gold. Omar shifted, her posture stiffening. You're reaching, Caroline, she said. What exactly are you implying? Levit held up a document. I don't imply, I state facts. She placed it on the podium. Let's talk about the thinkers and movements you align with. Philosophers and activists who've shaped your theology. Some of them, let's say, have a very interesting track record. The room tensed. Reporters leaned in. This was spiraling into uncharted territory. Omar's lips pressed together. Every influence on my beliefs is open and consistent with compassion. Levit smirked. Open, sure, but consistent? I have here a report showing ties to ideologies that reject divine authority outright. Omar interrupted. And what about your side, Caroline? Should we talk about the rigid doctrines fueling your argument? Levit nodded. By all means, if there's error, expose it. But don't dodge the question. We're talking about your influences now. Omar exhaled sharply. This is a smear tactic. It's what you do when you can't engage the real debate. Levit shrugged. If it's a smear, refute it. Tell us why these ideas shape your God. Omar hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. Levit saw it, and so did the cameras. The silence stretched, heavy and accusing. No answer, Levit said, leaning in. Interesting. Omar's jaw tightened. This conversation is a farce. Levit smiled. You're free to leave, Ilhan, but walking away won't change the truth. Omar clenched her fists. I'm not going anywhere. Levit gestured to the reporters. Then let's keep going, because I'm just warming up. Omar leaned forward, her frustration spilling over. Enough of this nonsense. This is nothing but theater. Levit tilted her head. Funny, because the evidence says otherwise. Speaking of which, let's tackle one more thing your camp conveniently ignores. She pulled out another document. The camera zoomed in. You've resisted calls for clarity on God's role in human suffering? Why? Omar scoffed. Because those calls were stunts to silence questioning voices. Levit flipped through the pages. Interesting, because the record shows those questions cut across all beliefs, seeking only truth. So why block them? Omar clenched her jaw. Because they're designed to drown out the marginalized, the seekers. Levit shook her head. So you're saying demanding clarity on God's justice is an attack on the marginalized? Murmurs spread through the room. Even some sympathetic reporters looked uncertain. Omar exhaled sharply. This is a distraction. People don't care about these so-called exposés. They care about meaning, hope, survival. Levit crossed her arms. And yet, instead of answering, you pivot again. If your theology holds, why not embrace the challenge? Omar's expression hardened. Because I don't bow to bad faith traps. Levit smiled, sensing victory. That's what people say when they're out of answers. The tension was suffocating. For the first time, Omar looked shaken. Levit leaned in, voice steady. We're not done. Let's talk about what you've been dodging. Omar's grip on the table tightened. She'd faced fierce debates before, but this was relentless, and the cameras caught every crack in her armor. Levit turned a page. You've had years to address God's nature in a fractured world, yet your statements raise more questions than answers. Omar's face didn't shift. Let me guess. Another cherry-picked quote? Levit smiled. I'll let the people decide. She read aloud. God is a mystery we define together. Do you still stand by that? The room went silent. Even skeptics knew this was a loaded question. Omar let out a slow breath. That's been twisted by people like you, Caroline. Levit nodded. So clarify, what did you mean? Is God a collective fiction or a reality beyond us? Omar sat still. I don't need to justify myself to someone distorting my words. Levit pressed further. So you refuse to define him? Omar crossed her arms. I refuse to play your game. Levit leaned forward. A game where we hold thinkers accountable? You're doing that to yourself, Ilhan. Omar exhaled sharply. This is all designed to paint me as the villain. Levit smirked. What's fascinating, Ilhan, is that every time I raise a hard question, you don't clarify. You deflect. The silence lingered. Omar shifted, visibly uncomfortable. Levit wasn't relenting. Let's move on, she said, flipping to another page. Your public stances on divinity, let's examine them. Omar inhaled sharply. What about them? Levit's smirk returned. You claim God is all compassion, yet you sidestep his justice. Why? Omar scoffed. Those are your words, not mine. Levit didn't blink. Then explain it. Why shy away from the hard edges of faith? Omar shook her head. Because your version of God is a tool for control. Levit nodded slowly, then turned to the cameras. And yet, the very mystery you champion leaves people adrift. Gasps echoed. Omar opened her mouth, but Levit was already moving on. Let's talk about the thinkers you lean on, the ones who question God's very existence. Omar exhaled sharply. This is absurd, Levit leaned in. What's absurd is the contradiction. You can't have it both ways, Ilhan. Omar clenched her fists. You twist everything. But I stand for inquiry, not dogma. Levit leaned closer. Then prove it. Answer the questions. Silence. Omar swallowed hard. The cameras captured her struggle. She had no reply, and the world was watching. Omar exhaled slowly, her frustration barely veiled. This is why people turn away from these debates. It's all noise, no substance. Levit didn't budge. It's not noise, Ilhan. It's accountability. You've dodged every question today. A murmur ran through the room. Omar felt the shift. Even her usual allies watched her differently now. A journalist from the back spoke up. Ms. Omar, do you deny your theology leans on relativistic ideas? Omar gripped the microphone. I deny it's a weakness. My faith is about seeking, not dictating. Levit smirked. And yet, your seeking leaves the people you claim to serve with nothing solid. Omar let out a sharp breath. Let's talk about your side, then. Centuries of rigid doctrines that crushed free thought. Levit crossed her arms. Go ahead. I welcome the scrutiny. But I came with evidence. You came with evasions. Omar knew she was losing ground. The cameras caught every hesitation, every falter. Levit glanced at the clock. I could go all day, but I think your time's up. Omar's fingers curled into fists. This isn't over. Levit smirked. Oh, I know. We'll do this again soon. Omar stood, smoothing her jacket as if composure could erase the hour's toll. Reporters shouted questions, but she walked off, heels echoing. Levit watched, arms crossed, a faint smile lingering. A reporter turned to her. Caroline, does today prove Ilhan's theology is flawed? Levit paused, then spoke clearly. Today proves one thing. When pressed with real questions, she crumbles. The faithful deserve better. Another reporter stepped forward. Should she retract her views? Levit tilted her head. That's for the people to decide. But leaders should stand firm, not buckle under scrutiny. Reporters scribbled. Omar's absence screamed louder than words. Levit gathered her papers and walked out, unshaken. The hall buzzed, the battle far from over. Within minutes, the internet ignited. Clips of Omar's silence and Levit's onslaught flooded feeds. Headlines blared. Omar exposed? Levit dominates debate. Omar scrolled through them in her office, jaw tight. We stay on message, she told her team. Call it a hit job and shift the focus. Across town, Levit watched the coverage, smiling. Let them spin, she said. The truth's out there now. And it was, raw, unfiltered, and undeniable. The confrontation between Caroline Levit and Ilhan Omar reveals profound messages about accountability, conviction, and the pursuit of truth. Lessons that resonate deeply in everyday life. At its core, the story underscores the importance of standing firm in one's beliefs when challenged. Yet it also warns against evading hard questions with deflections or silence. Levit's relentless probing and Omar's struggle to respond highlight that true strength lies not in avoiding scrutiny, but in facing it with clarity and courage. This teaches us to embrace accountability in our own lives, whether in personal relationships, work, or self-reflection, rather than retreating behind excuses or ambiguity. Moreover, the debate exposes the danger of clinging to comforting narratives at the expense of deeper truths, urging us to question our assumptions and seek evidence beyond what feels convenient. It's a call to engage with life's complexities, not just its comforts, fostering resilience and intellectual honesty. Applied practically, this means having the humility to admit when we're wrong, the boldness to defend what we know is right, and the wisdom to listen when others challenge us. Ultimately, the story reminds us that growth, personal or collective, demands an unflinching commitment to truth, even when the cameras of life are rolling.